So our heart has the ability to generate the very fields that the stuff of our world is made of. And our own physics textbooks say if you want to change the stuff of reality, you have to change either the electrical field or the magnetic field, and there's a term for both. The Stark effect and the Zeeman effect allow us to change the electrical and the magnetic fields. So our own science is telling us that. So what the discoveries now are showing is that when we have a feeling in our heart, we are actually creating the electrical and the magnetic waves that change the quality of the atoms of our world. They literally interrupt the flow of space and time and rearrange the stuff this world is made of. And to the degree that we are trained and condition ourselves to do that, to that degree do we affect our reality. For some people it's minimal, for some people it appears miraculous. The bottom line to all of this, and this is what the ancient traditions always said, is that we're invited to feel the feelings inside of our heart for the things that we would like to experience in our lives, to feel as if they've already happened, rather than asking for them to happen and feeling powerless in our world, which we all do from time to time, and there's nothing wrong with asking for intervention. But what the science is showing us and what the texts, 5,000-year-old texts, left us instructions, very clear instructions, and they said when you would like to change your body or change your world, rather than feeling what you don't have, feel as if it's already happened. And that didn't make a lot of sense to us. It sounds like hocus pocus to a scientist until we understand that when we have that feeling, what we're literally doing is creating the electrical and the magnetic template. It's the blueprint in our heart that the quantum stuff of our universe congeals around to give us the reality that matches what it is that we've felt. And while we all do it subconsciously from time to time, I think we're reaching a time in history now where we recognize that we're a family on this planet, and that when we come together in cooperation, not that we impose our will or control or manipulate our reality. That's not what this is about. The physicist John Wheeler, the colleague of Einstein, has called it participation. He said we participate in creating the kind of reality that we choose to have, whether it's the biology of one human body or the peace between nations in a broad geographic area. We now know that we are part of all of that, and the role that we play is directly determined by our willingness to accept our role as part of that. And it changes everything. It changes everything because for 300 years of science, we've been conditioned to believe that we're separate from the world, that we have very little power upon anything that happens in our world, that we are victims of whatever life brings our way, and we just do the best we can do and hope for the best outcome. And all that now is beginning to change, and it's our own science that's catching up in a language that we trust, the language of quantum physics and science. They're catching up with the very principles that say precisely the same things that have been here for, in some cases, 5,000, 6,000 years. So it's bringing those two ways of knowing, two great ways, science and spirituality, weaving them together into a single wisdom that's greater than either of them are together, and helping us to become better people, create a better world, and hopefully address the challenges that we're finding in our world. It's a very exciting time, that there is an intelligent field of energy that underlies our physical reality. And we know that field is there. It's been documented. It's what's called a non-conventional field of energy. It doesn't work like electricity, so we've never had the equipment to measure it. We were trying to measure it with equipment that measures things like television signals and radio waves, and the energy doesn't work that way. So it was only in the late 90s, early 2000s that we really had widespread access to the technology to measure these things. There were pioneers in the late 1800s, Tesla, Rife, people who had gleamings of insight into how our world works, and they were telling us this 100 years ago. But widespread in the academic and peer-reviewed papers, this has only become accepted within the last few years. So we're only arriving at the place where these ancient traditions began. And this is where the science and the spirituality, I believe, really can serve one another. Because the scientists say, okay, there's a field out there, and it connects everything. We influence that field, and they're saying, what do we do with it? They're scratching their heads. They're saying, what do we do with it? The ancient traditions and our most cherished indigenous and spiritual traditions, they started from that place. They said, yeah, everything's connected. Greg, you're talking about having these feelings in the heart. We thought that your thoughts create your reality. You hear that a lot. So isn't it the thoughts that are really doing this? Well, thoughts are important, but this is the new part. The new studies are showing that the human brain also creates electrical and magnetic fields, but they're relatively weak compared to the heart. The heart is about 100 times stronger electrically than the human brain. And the heart is about 5,000 times stronger magnetically than the human brain. So if we're going to create an electrical or a magnetic field that affects our reality, it probably can be done with thought, and that's why it's so much more difficult. It's much easier to feel the feeling with our hearts. So our brains create the image. We model, we simulate with our brain. What is it we like to see? What is it we like to experience? And once we have that locked into place, we can feel the feeling of gratitude and appreciation for what has already happened and give power to what it is that we're thinking. And this is a very powerful internal technology that apparently was lost to the West about 2 centuries ago. And the instructions now are just now being found in many of the texts that have been recovered in the last 100 years, the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Nag Hammadi Library, the Coptic libraries, the Tibetan libraries. They have preserved the instructions in their texts that tell us how to use this very powerful inner technology. Now our science is catching up with it. As scientists now are beginning to understand, is consciousness. It's our belief. It's the way we feel, the limitations that we have accepted culturally, through our families, throughout history. What science has told us, we have tended to give great credence to our limits rather than thinking of ourselves as empowered beings. And whether we're consciously aware of it or not, the subconscious belief that we're powerless victims in this world just has a tremendous influence in everything we do. Even very conscious people spent their lives in ashrams and in a cave meditating in a monastery, halfway around the world at 17,000 feet above sea level. There are places within their being where the theme of being a powerless victim plays such a dominant role in their lives that stands between them and their greatest capabilities as well. In the Sanskrit traditions, which is the root of many of the things we're talking about today, what we find is a system of 7 chakras, 7 energy systems, 3 lower ones, the heart, and 3 upper centers here. And these centers in the Sanskrit traditions are linked directly to the components that you're talking about and we're conversing about for manifestation. The upper 3 energy centers are linked to what we would call our thought processes or our communication processes. And the lower 3 are linked to what we would call emotion. And they define emotion a little bit differently than we do. They say that there are 2 primary emotions that we are capable of, and those are love is one of those emotions, and then whatever we believe the opposite of love is, on the opposite end of the spectrum. So it's like 2 polarities of the same energy. So for many people, it's love and fear. So they say that the way we work in this world, the way we manifest, is in our upper centers, we think, we communicate, we speak with someone else, what it is, we verbalize what we would like to experience, we imagine in our mind. That's the thought. And an affirmation is a thought only. And it's an empty thought unless we put some energy into it. And the way we put that energy into it is by pumping, imbuing the energy of these lower energy centers, our love for what we're thinking, or subconsciously our fear of what we're thinking. And when we do that, when we marry the thought and the emotion together, they come together in this mysterious, magical, precious place right in the center of our hearts. And this is what the ancients say, this is where the action is. It's in our hearts, and by definition, we create a feeling. Feeling is the union of thought and emotion. The feeling is what creates the waves that speak to the field, the matrix in our universe. The feeling is what creates. So unless we have imbued our affirmation with the emotion of our love for our perfect mate that's manifesting now, or our abundance or our healing or the healing of our loved ones, they may become just an empty thought. And for people who became frustrated with their affirmations, they said their affirmations 100,000 times a day and nothing happened, and they lost interest, they felt disempowered, they felt like victims. They said, that stuff doesn't work. It's because we only had half of the formula. So the feeling is what actually creates, and that's why, to me, it makes tremendous sense. If the feeling is what creates, then you've got to give that field something to work with so it can show you what it is that you're creating. Why not feel what it is that you'd like to experience so the field can give that back to you, rather than feeling the things that you don't have or you don't want, because that's the blueprint that the field gives back to you as well. It's a very subtle, it's this little subtle shift from into thinking from the outcome rather than thinking from the place of lack and hoping something changes. So the feeling that we're creating is very closely associated with what we call belief. Belief and feeling both occur in the heart. When you have a belief about something, you've got usually really strong feelings about that belief. You take some of the most controversial topics in our society today, abortion, assisted suicide, right to die, euthanasia. And anytime you bring those topics up, there are a lot of feelings that go around the beliefs of what we have with that. So they're very closely related. So you ask the question, is it important to believe? Yes, it is. To the degree that we believe we are healed, to that degree, when we begin creating those kinds of patterns in our bodies, our heart will send the signals to our brains saying this body is healed. And to meet that, the brain will flood the body with the chemistry that will allow that healing. We've seen this documented medically. So that's inside of our bodies. The same principle now is being documented beyond our bodies. So the effect is not limited to our bodies. The field carries those effects beyond our bodies into our physical world, and in that way, we influence. Again, I'm not going to say the word control or manipulate. We're not imposing our will, but we do influence. We have the ability to influence the outcome of the events in our lives, individually and collectively.